Okay, genuine question. Are flagship smartphones in trouble? I think 2025 has already been a fantastic year for very well priced phones. We've had the Nothing Phone 3A series, which is just a very interesting option and again, very well priced. The Xiaomi 15, which for me has got real kind of iPhone 13 mini vibes. There's just something about this phone and it's got an amazing camera system. Right at the start of the year, we had the OnePlus 13, which is just utterly brilliant, a real flagship killer. It's kind of flagship itself, but again, it's not that expensive based on what it can do. Then more recently, we have the POCO F7 Ultra and POCO F7 Pro. This is just amazing. It's got the Snapdragon 8 Elite chip in here, the flagship chip, and it costs half as much as phones that have it elsewhere. Then we had the iPhone 16e. But in Android land, I love that phone, by the way. I do love it. This is my main phone, but it's massively crippled, and Android kind of kicks it into a cocked hat. Android destroys it basically, and it's destroyed it again today with the OPPO Reno 13 Pro and the OPPO Reno 13 FS. This is the European cheaper variant basically, but in this video I'll be talking mainly about the Pro. They're both incredibly well priced. They both say a lot, I think, about flagships in terms of why would you buy a flagship, and weirdly they play really nicely with the iPhone. No, really. So before I get into it, guys, just a very quick plug for my newsletter. If you want free access to my Discord server, which is full of very interesting people and occasionally me, additional content, special offers from our partners, it's completely free. It drops into your inbox every week and you can unsubscribe at any time, but there's a link down below if you want to go and check that out. Let's get into this phone. Oh, right. I need to break the fourth wall here, guys. Content creation isn't easy. Do we make it look easy? We probably don't, to be fair, but it's not as easy as you might think. I've genuinely tried to film this section of the video about 30 times, and it's the specs and pricing of the Reno 13 series. Nothing against the phones at all, but I think I've reached the point where smartphone specs are getting a little bit predictable and pointless in terms of talking about them on these videos, because straight up, these are both very good phones, as you'll find out in a second, in terms of most areas. Most elements of them are really good. So what happens inside these devices to make that stuff happen isn't that important. It's important if you care about that stuff, but if you're thinking about buying the Reno 13 Pro or the Reno 13 FS, you probably don't care too much about the specs. You just want to know what it does, and does it do it well? So I think, shall I just go straight into that? Well, very, very quickly, this has a mid-range MediaTek chip in here. This one, the FS, has a very mid-range Snapdragon chip in here, which you kind of expect when this one costs 329 quid and this one costs, let me just double check, 649 quid. That's the specs and the pricing section done. Let's get into the meat of these phones. Right, let's talk about design, and I think the Reno 13 Pro is a beautiful looking phone. It reminded me of the Xiaomi 15, which as soon as I got this out the box, I thought, ooh, that's lovely. It's just such a nice device. That same thing happened with the Reno 13 Pro. I got it out and thought, if I'd bought this, and I haven't, this is a review unit, but if I'd bought it, I'd be happy. And that's so important, that first experience of a phone. You've spent the money on it, it arrives, you don't want to be disappointed. You know, you want to get it out the box and think, I've spent good money here, and trust me, the Reno 13 Pro delivers that in spades. The camera bump, for some reason, and this is a good thing, isn't really chunky. They've somehow managed to keep it very slim, to be honest, which is lovely. The sides aren't brushed aluminium or shiny aluminium. It's just very stealthy. It's a stealthy looking phone. I really like it. They talk quite a bit about durability, and I did test this, obviously completely intentionally. It kind of fell from a height of about there as I was kind of getting into the car. It picked up some damage, but the more I look at it, the less I think it's an issue. So it's picked up a bit of damage there, but it was a very horrible drop, to be honest, and it's dealt with it very well. The screen protector did its job, no problems with the screen. The rear of the phone is absolutely fine, so it's durable, which is good for clumsy people. The display, what more can I say about Android smartphone displays, guys? It's big, it's a nice big display, it's got a pinhole camera, it's still got facial recognition. It's got an under-screen fingerprint reader. The bezels are very small. It's a very fast display. It's got a 120 Hz refresh rate because of course it has. It's very bright. I've used this in direct sunlight with no issues whatsoever. The nits, I think it's got 1200 nits or something. It doesn't matter. It's really bright. It's really fast. It's massive. It's much better, I think, than the iPhone display, mainly because it doesn't have Monkey Island at the top, and certainly when you compare it against the iPhone 16e, it has a fast refresh rate. So design is fantastic, display is great. The only thing I would say is that I would love some different color options. This is very smart. It does pick up quite a lot of smudges. I have to keep doing that, as is always the case with smartphones these days, but I would like some, imagine like a yellow one, an orange one. That would be great. This seems to be par for the course these days. If you go for the FS, you do get some slightly more interesting colors like this one here. This is like a kind of bluey kind of thing, which has got like almost like a halo effect around the camera bump, which I quite like. So again, it looks like a really nice phone. This is so cheap, this phone, guys. Under 400 quid. The bezels are a bit bigger. You can see here the bezels on the FS are just a little bit bigger here and there, but it still feels nice. What's next? Camera. When it comes to the camera system, I have one simple task that I throw at these phones, which is basically, can it survive as a dad camera? Now, if you're a parent, if you're a mum, or if you're a dad, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about with this. You need two things from your smartphone when it comes to the camera system. One, it needs to take the photo quickly and at the right moment to capture that moment. And secondly, it needs to produce an image which looks good enough and is sharp enough and can be blown up enough to be a canvas print. So if you've got those two things within your camera system on your phone, you're winning. And it doesn't matter about the specs. It doesn't matter about the aperture on each lens. It doesn't really matter about the optical image stabilization. It doesn't matter about AI or what's the optical focal length and all that sort of stuff. All that stuff pales into insignificance when you just want to capture the moment. And really, if it does those two things that I've just mentioned, it doesn't matter how it does it. It does not matter. And the one thing I'll say about the OPPO Reno 13 Pro is that it has taken my favorite ever photo of me and my son, and that means the world to me, and that makes me rather biased about this camera system. So basically, the very quick story, I'd been away for a week on a press trip, got home, and pretty much immediately went out with my family. And my girlfriend, who's not a photographer, she'll be the first to admit that she's not the best at taking photos because she's again, she just points at things and presses the shutter button like so many people. She did that with this. This is a portrait photo, by the way, if you're wondering. One shot, bang. Look at it. I mean, okay, I'm sure you could pick fault with it. It's not a technically perfect photo, although I think it's done a very good job. But it's irrelevant. It's captured the nicest moment ever, which meant so much to me on that day. So excuse me if I gush about this camera system. I won't, because that's unfair, but it did that job. This was almost the first photo that this phone took, and it nailed it, basically. I think overall, though, the photos it produces are great. They are quite sharpened. The likes of OPPO and the rest of the smartphone brands must over sharpen these images a bit, because it must be something that that their customers want. It doesn't matter. The dynamic range is pretty good as well. There's a bit of lens flare here and there that I saw when I was shooting into sunlight, and if the sun was just out of the frame. Overall, a very good camera system. The 3.5x optical is nice. I think that's enough in most scenarios. The 7x that you get above that is just a bit too far, a bit too long, I think, a bit too processed. Beyond that, again, like every other smartphone I've tested recently, the digital zoom, the kind of AI-ified zoom is just too much. I know why these options exist on these phones, because it's a bit of a contest between the brands. They want to see who can do the best AI-influenced photography beyond 10x, but it just doesn't have any use for me personally. But general, everyday shooting, this phone nails it. It really does. It's also got an underwater mode, which is interesting, although I've not tested that because it would involve taking this phone to a swimming pool and then taking photos underwater and then getting banned from my gym for life. And I don't fancy doing that. But if you do take photos underwater, this could be quite interesting. It gets away with this feature because it's got IP69 water resistance, which is obviously the top IP rating you can get on smartphones at the moment. And it basically disables the touchscreen and gives you shooting access on the buttons. So one button to take the shot, one button to shoot video, etc. And then it's got the one-tap drainage function, which is a little bit like the Apple Watch, where when you get it out the water, you press a button, and I think it uses the speaker system to eject the water out. Interesting. It's got the usual AI editing features, so, enhancing the resolution, erasing stuff from photos, which it does pretty well to be fair, unblurring blurry photos, and removing reflections from windows. Again, standard fare these days unless you buy the iPhone 16e. Video performance is pretty good. It shoots right up to 4K 60 frames per second on both the front and back cameras, which is nice. The results are pretty good, I think. It does have that kind of slight jerkiness occasionally with the stabilization, which you do get on Android phones for some reason, I'm not sure why, but it's beyond that. It's actually a pretty good shooter when it comes to video. So the camera system, guys, because it took that photo of me in Harrison, I love it. And I'm not apologizing for that. I'm a dad, and if you're a dad or a mum, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Performance, and I genuinely don't know what more I can say about smartphone performance these days. I can't think of the last time that a smartphone crashed on me to the point where it froze and I had to restart it. Equally, I can't think of the last time that I held a smartphone and thought, oh, this is a bit sluggish, a bit jittery, a bit not very satisfying to use. Even the FS, the Reno 13 FS, which in Europe has a Snapdragon 6, it's quite a relatively old Snapdragon chip. It doesn't feel like that. It still feels nice and fluid. Yes, if you're doing intense gaming, etc., then you wouldn't buy a 329 quid phone, would you? You'd get something else. The OPPO Reno 13 Pro, again, feels, as you'd expect, incredibly fluid, very much a flagship performance phone really in terms of everyday use, and they have done quite a bit in terms of improving things like the cooling system and various other things under the hood to make it good enough for modern gaming. I don't do any form of modern gaming on my smartphone, so I can't test that really, but it should hold up quite well if you don't want to spend over 1,000 quid. The battery life, amazing. And again, I don't know what more I can say about battery life on Android smartphones, because most of them pretty much give you 2 days in normal use and an almost comical amount of time in standby mode. They lose so few percentage points if they're just left unattended. They're just so easy to live with, very fast charging. It kind of brings me to my conclusion about these phones, which is the fact that they really make you think about flagships. Flagships like the iPhone 16 Pro Max have a place. They absolutely do. They always will. There's always going to be people who want the best of the best. I completely get that. I used to be like that as well, but I think I'm becoming less of that person the more I use mid-range smartphones, because they are so good. And OPPO has done it again. The Reno 13 series is brilliant. The only bad thing these days is that if you're buying a mid-range Android smartphone, you've almost got too much choice. There's so many good phones out there. Just make sure these ones are on your list. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It makes a massive difference. Hit that subscribe button and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Oh, I completely forgot to mention the Reno 13 series also plays very well with the iPhone. So it's got a kind of quick share feature with the iPhone where you can basically place both phones next to each other and transfer both ways. So you could take a photo on your iPhone and then share it with your mate who's got a Reno 13 and who has spent less than you probably and is probably happier with their phone. Interesting.